Good morning, good evening. Welcome to week 4 of PSSL 6240 here at George Washington University Safety and Security Leadership Program. I'll go without the PowerPoints for this week, so you'll just see my image for this week, and next week I'll return back to the narrated PowerPoint briefs. I want to just start off with announcements. Adobe Connect session on Thursday, I think it went pretty well, barring the technology hindrances sometimes, and that's to be expected. I think the briefer did a pretty good job. Just a reminder, the next one is May 28th, and that'll be on WMD terrorism. So if you can make it, great. And if you're briefing, I look forward to your briefing then. Second announcement, GW, the reason I'm not posting this on Saturday night like I usually do is I was at the GW graduation. I saw several both online and in-person students of mine in the past, and I would recommend, I know this is a couple of years out for most of you, but I would recommend going to it. It was actually a pretty nice event for the students, a nice way to recognize the achievement. It's a smaller ceremony that's just for CPS, College Professional Studies students. Pretty good speeches. It's not like the big graduation that's held on Sunday at GW on the White House lawn. This is a more smaller, kind of more focused program. So if you're in the DC area, I'd highly recommend you go. And even if you're out of the DC area a couple years from now, I'd recommend maybe making arrangements if it's not too expensive. And just trying to participate in that event. So just something to consider in the next couple of years when you're actually done with this program. Third announcement, current events, something we don't get involved too much in this program, and I regret that. But I just want to bring two current events to your attention, one that made headlines and the other that should have made headlines but really did not. The one that should have made headlines but was low-key, Wired magazine reported that a researcher had actually taken control of an aircraft, had used cyber methods to actually take control of the computer, the navigation system on an aircraft. And I will shoot that link to you all. Did not make the news, should have made the news. I think this could be the first way that a cyber terrorist might have an impact on people's lives and actually killing people and subverting our aviation security methods. Very interesting article, and I'll go ahead and send it out. And again, it's something that should have made the headline. It should have made a lot more news this week. What has made news, for those of you who haven't heard, we captured or killed a senior ISIS commander, Abu Sayyaf, who was the ringleader, the terrorism finance ringleader for ISIS. We talked about terrorist finance this past week. We will be talking about high-value targeting in week 7. And one thing I want you to think forward is, does this high-value targeting of ISIS leadership, the risks that we take, is it worth it? And would that lead to a demise in the leadership? Or are we just killing the number 1 person and then the number 2 person can just take over with no degradation in the organization? So think about that. This was a very risky operation that was done, and fortunately it was executed flawlessly. The second thing I want you to think about this week is, or pertaining to this operation, is this one was executed somewhat flawlessly. We've been doing these raids in Syria and in occupied areas of Iraq. Eventually one of these raids are going to go bad. There will be another Black Hawk Down incident where the ISIS or whoever we're facing shoots down an aircraft, and there's people are going to get killed, and we'll have to justify, okay, is it worth it, given the casualties that we face and the eventually the propaganda victory that we would hand to the enemy. And I do fear, I predict this will happen. There'll be another kind of Black Hawk Down incident where U.S. soldiers are being put on camera in ways that would impact the U.S. psyche. Let's just say that. So just consider that forward as we're doing these raids against ISIS and we're raiding against Syria. It's a bloodless war for the most part now, but when it gets violent, our viewpoints might change, and I'll leave it at that. So, review of week 3, Road to 9/11. Great commentary on it. I think everyone kind of hit the head on the political, social, economic factors that led not just to the road to 9/11, but why there was so much anti-Americanism in those days right after 9/11. Why there were people celebrating the attacks on 9/11. I think the Zakaria and the documentary give a little bit different viewpoints on that. One looks at the long history. The documentary goes back to the Crusades and the Versailles Treaty. One goes to the short history and goes back to 1967 and the Six-Day War. Hint, hint, you'll have to choose a side on that and make an argument for the final. You may or may not be doing that for the final. So just keep that in mind. I tend to follow the Zakaria logic for the most part. I think there's the near reason for it. The documentary goes into the Versailles Treaty and how it split up the Middle East. And that's certainly relevant, especially when we're talking about Syria and Iraq and what's going on now. That is very relevant. But just keep in mind there are a lot of other countries split up and had bad borders drawn in Asia and Africa, and they don't resort to that transnational terrorism that you see in the Middle East. So think like a social scientist. Social scientists will look, okay, why is there violence in the Middle East, or why is there transnational terrorism? And then they would do comparison studies looking at the variables that say, okay, this variable is present in the Middle East, but it's also present here. So what other variables are there that might separate the Middle East? So think about that as you're trying to determine road to 9/11, or what are those social factors. And then finally, we talked week 3, terrorism, finance. I think some of the videos you saw regarding terrorism finance, I think it was the quote that comes out, terrorist organizations are financial or fundraising organizations that occasionally kill somebody. And I think that's pretty accurate. And as we go forward, particularly after what happened against ISIS this morning, will ISIS turn into, because of their, let me back up. They were a powerhouse organization because of their fundraising prowess. As that fundraising gets cut off, gets impacted, will ISIS now go way of the dodo bird? Will it be eventually just a criminal organization that can be undermined quite easily? Something to consider. And is finance, or getting at their finances, the way to transfer them into a kind of just a gangsterism instead of some sort of organized political force? So just keep those in mind for terrorism finance. Just going on to next week, two sections: terrorist adaptation. The reading for terrorist adaptation is thick. It is the Rand article, and I'll tell you right now, it's very thick, a little bit hard to get through. What I'm going to ask you to do is, instead of just reading the whole thing back to front, choose one of the organizations that it brings up. It talks about, it does comparative analysis between the IRA, the Earth Liberation Front, Shinrikyo, and Hezbollah. Choose one of those organizations it talks to, and then for your discussion section, go in depth and talk about the adaptation cycle. When you're going through the reading and going through the lecture, ask, like I mentioned, a social scientist, why do certain organizations succeed? Hezbollah has been around for 20 or almost 30, over 30 years now. Why has it succeeded? Why has it gone from just a few guys starting this organization to resist the Israeli incursions into Lebanon, and now it's a political organization that has its own highly trained military with advanced weapons? That's success for a terrorist organization. Why is that successful? While Shinrikyo has been essentially been littered to the dustbin of history. No one cares about Shinrikyo anymore. Why? Same thing with Earth Liberation Front. Why is that not successful? But Hamas is successful. It's a political entity now. It owns territory and controls population. So ask those variables, and that's kind of what I'm going to be asking in the discussion section as you go through those terrorist organizations. And again, choose one and go in depth there. So when you're reading through the RAND article, focus on just one organization. Maybe read their Wikipedia page or some of their background material on it, and then look at those adaptation points as you're studying that group. So that covers terrorist adaptation. The second point, terrorism WMD. I'll be honest, the reason I assign that is because, well, two reasons I should say. One, as you've probably seen in the writing, the only real way a terrorist could have a existential impact or a large impact on our society is if they use WMD. That's what that's the only way they could, as Osama bin Laden, would be to even the score between the United States. That's reason one. Reason two, and this is a little bit personal to me, is there are so many myths relating to WMD that it is very easy for media, government, politicians to scare the population by just raising the specter of terrorism and WMD without really thinking about the science and technology and policy issues relating to this problem set. We largely went to war in Iraq because of WMD. I'll honestly, we largely went to war in Iraq because of the fear that Saddam Hussein would transfer WMD to terrorist organizations and create another, 9/11 times 10. That argument should have been meted out with a lot more skepticism than it did. Most people regret going into war in Iraq, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and we went into war again because too many people were not aware of. Too many people were just scared of the terrorism WMD specter without asking the right questions. I am hoping that after you get through that section, you can look at the next time there's an incident or next time a politician talks about terrorism WMD, that you can go with and ask the right questions and look with a little bit more skepticism and try and actually analyze the threat and the capabilities than just haphazardly saying terrorism WMD. And I see it in my current job too. I see millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars being appropriated for counterterrorism WMD, and all you have to say is you're going to be the person that causes thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to die because you didn't fund whatever program is being assigned. So I see it in my current job. I see it on TV, and I'm putting that section there so you can look at the terrorism WMD issue with a lot more skepticism will probably be the best way to put it. So I look forward to your discussion boards. I look forward to reading your papers for the first section. I've gotten no requests for extensions, so I'm taping this now on Sunday night, and I should see your papers by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. And I look forward to reading those. I should get those back to you by the end of the week. And if there's any other questions or issues, don't hesitate to contact me.